there's a couple of things that I would stress. One is most people don't go through the process of setting up a capability brief with them. Absolutely. One of the first things you should do is a capability brief. Once you identify who's buying what you sell, which is really easy to do. There's a lot of free software from usaspending.gov to sam.gov. You can go in the data banks and find exactly who's buying it, the contracting officer names. You can reach out to these people and request a capabilities brief. That's the number one thing. Number two,
welcome to the Real Construction Owners Podcast, where we interview real construction owners and the leaders within our industry who help us succeed. Today, we have a very special guest, Michael LeJeune, the owner of Game Changers for Government Contractors, as well as a best-selling author. You're going to want to listen closely if you want to learn more about government contracts and how they can benefit you. Stay tuned. What's up, Michael? How you doing today, buddy?
Hey, doing great, man. Glad to be here.
Man, thanks for being on this call. I know that we're going to dive into some deep stuff today about government contracts and processes and profits. And if you're a contractor or if you're somebody who is intrigued about government contracts, drop in the comments below where you're listening in from and let us know what exactly you want to know. But before we go any further, Michael, tell us your story. How'd you get into government contracts? What were you doing before all this?
Sure. Well, when I started in government contracts, if I go back to the beginning, I started because I was in the Army. And when I was in the Army, I noticed that everybody around me was a government contractor. I was at Fort Hood working in the Force 21 program. And when you're doing that, there's more government contractors than there are soldiers. And so I watched their transition from soldier to contractor. And, they were poor and barely making it. Next thing I know, they're driving brand new cars and, wearing nice clothes and enjoying life a little bit. And I thought, you know what, this is a pretty nice life. Let me look into this. And so I started looking in. I'm like, it's actually pretty fun. There's a lot of stuff to do. You get to travel, you get to do all these cool things. And so I made a transition right out of, the uniform right into government contracting. I was primarily focused in the software space at the time. And then very quickly went through kind of this journey where I was on the road to getting my degree, but then I kind of got sidetracked by sales and kind of the mystique around that. And so really like doing the sales side of it, working directly with the contractors as well as the government folks. And so that's really what got my start. And I was kind of thrown into the deep end where nobody really knew what we were doing. So we all had to figure it out. And I like research and that sort of thing. And that was about 20 years ago that I started in that space. And about 5 years after that, I started working with my own clients. So I started my own business, working with my own clients. And I've been doing that for about 15 years now. So
that's awesome. I know that you are an authority figure within the government contract space. And people who are listening in are primarily contractors, and they want to know how to win these contracts. What are the benefits? What are the upsides? What are the risks? Can you elaborate from your experience, some of your clients, like what are some of the things they've done in the construction space with government contracts?
Yeah, and it's almost market agnostic. So regardless of whether you sell construction or software or anything else, the basic process is the same. And I think this is the area that trips up everybody. Everybody thinks that when you get in, you try and fill out these certifications for your small business, your economically disadvantaged, your WOSB, your fill in the blank, whatever it is. And if you do that, the government's just going to hand you contracts. And that's not how it works. The way that every company that I've ever worked with thrives is by doing one thing. They get to know the customer and they work what I call pre-acquisition, where the customer's thinking about some things they want to do, they want to buy, but they have not put it out on the market yet. If you get in this business, and I don't care what you sell, if you get in this business and you just go on sam.gov and hunt for opportunities all day, the odds are you're only going to win maybe 5% of those opportunities. And the reason behind that is the fact that all of those opportunities are already wired for somebody else. There's people that have been working pre-acquisition for 2, 3, 4 years prior to those opportunities coming out. And so the government's been talking to them a really long time. So if you really want to win, you've got to focus on the pre-acquisition phase, which means before it hits the market. And that's the number one thing that most people skip. They don't get to learn the customer. They don't learn anything about what their problems are, their challenges are, or what their upcoming contracts are. Because that's another thing. If you are getting to know the customer, you will very quickly identify that they have a bunch of contract vehicles that they regularly buy off of. You'll find out that they have contracts that are coming up for recompete. And then none of this stuff is a surprise to you, because I guarantee you, if you find a multi-million-dollar contract, like say today, and the proposal's due in 2 or 3 weeks, you're not going to even have the time to pull together the resources to write the RFP if you just found out about this thing. So I can't stress enough how important pre-acquisition, getting to know the customer, getting to know what's going on in their world, how important that is to winning any contract.
I love that. That's so true. There's a section within the government realm that's called the sources sought. And that's when the government, better yet, you're the expert. Why don't you tell our audience, what does sources sought mean, and how can they use that to their advantage?
Well, and there's actually two things. So we have the sources sought, which means the government is actually still in a pre-acquisition mode, but they are actually interested in buying. They want to buy something, and they're looking for sources because they're not sure if there's anybody out there. So that's one. The other thing is called an RFI, a request for information. And a request for information is when the government is pretty sure they want to buy, but they're not really trying to commit to anything. They're trying to see what is out there in the market, what their options are. And that's a market research phase. You have more opportunity in an RFI stage than a sources sought one to actually influence the acquisition. So in the RFI stage, you can actually tell the government, hey, I know you're looking for 13 requirements in this new building you want to build, but here are 2 things you're not thinking of. You're not considering these couple of things that you should be, and these could be game changers for this project. So I'd highly recommend you consider A, B, C, D, whatever, and you can help influence the acquisition. You can also tell them, hey, because there's enough companies that are SDVOSB or HubZone or whatever it is, this should come out HubZone. It should come out under this NAICS code. It should come out full and open, or whatever it may be. You get to influence the acquisition, which is really, really important. Now, the hard part about an RFI is it's usually months, if not years, before an acquisition comes out. So a lot of people don't want to mess around with it, but it's really important in the grand scheme of actually influencing it. On the sources sought side, a lot of times that one's a little bit closer. So like if they put out a sources sought, they may 30 days, 60 days later, just buy the thing, whatever it is that they said. Hey, we need a new building or a new whatever, like a smaller building, not like a 20-story building or something like that, but they need something small. They asked about the sources sought, and then they may go ahead and move forward with a purchase. So it's a little bit different on those two, but you can still use the sources sought to influence as well. So
I love that. And when I read your book, I think it was Game Changers, that I've just blown away, because you said something that startled the heck out of me. You said that $20 billion does not get set aside to small businesses because small businesses don't raise their hand during the source of sought opportunity and say, hey, I want to bid that. Can you elaborate?
Yeah. And that's a really common thing and it's a frustration for contracting officers, where they'll put out these RFIs and sources sought and no one will respond, or one company will respond. And then guess what happens? They wind up putting it out full and open, and then anybody compete, or they just cancel it altogether. They may say, oh, well, there's zero interest in the market, so instead of putting out this $2 million contract, we're just going to cancel it and move on to the next thing on our plate. Because one of the things people don't realize is over the last 20 years, the contracting officer pool has shrunk significantly. We've lost probably 50, 60% of our contracting officers over the last 20 years. and they aren't getting replenished. But the budget, if you've watched anything with the economy, the budgets continue to exponentially grow. So that means there's, double, if not triple the amount of transactions that were going on 20 years ago, and there's half the staff. So if you're not going to respond to something like that, they're going to move on to where there is interest, and they're going to move on that. And then the other part of that is, if you're not responding to it as a small business and saying, hey, this should be small, it should be hub zone, it should be 8A, it should be Native American, whatever the socioeconomic status is, at the end of the day, if they have to procure it, they wind up going full and open because nobody has influenced them along the way.
It's interesting you say that, because even if you don't have a set aside status, you can still win contracts.
Absolutely.
Left and right. As long as it's a numbers game. There's two approaches. What are the two approaches in your perspective for a contractor? One, getting to know the customer, and or just throwing a wide net and throwing in a bunch of bids. Can you elaborate that?
Yeah, I think, the numbers game, I call it the brute force method, is the numbers game on our side. And, you can eventually win something using the brute force method, but it's so random that I don't recommend it. There's just, when I look at people and I say, hey, so how many RFPs are you responding to a month? And then how many are you winning? They're like, well, I'm responding to 10 or 12, and we typically don't win any. Well, how long can you do that? Right? It's very time intensive to write proposals and do all those sort of things. Now, it doesn't mean you have to know the customer every single time, because if you can be really competitive in the market and with your pricing, with the value you provide, you can go in and just respond to RFPs, and you can win some of those, but you've got to be really competitive. And the best thing is, if you're going to do that, to have some teaming partners, and have teaming partners that know the customer. So if you don't know the customer, someone on your team needs to know the customer. And that's a great situation to be in, because they likely have the past performance to do the work. Because that's what trips up a lot of people, is they go and respond to these RFPs, and it asks for specific past performance with that government agency or the government in general, and you don't have it. So that's where a teaming partner comes in really handy, where, that can fill a huge gap for a lot of people.
One of the benefits is, I won about just shy of $1 million last year in government construction contracts, and it was very profitable. And I love that we can use subcontractors' recent and relevant experiences within our own bid. And I did the brute force method. I did not do the other method, which was get to know your client and really, nurture that. I just went out and bid stuff from Alaska to Florida to Hawaii to New York, and won deals all over. Had fun, made a lot of money. But I see the benefit of what you're saying on how you want to get to know your customer. And can you share with our audience a tactic that they could do to stay on top of the mind of that CEO? Something they could do every 40 days or 50 or 60 days, to where that CEO is like, oh yeah, I need to reach out to this person for giving them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and let me go back for a minute there. What you did was not the norm. It's not the norm to be successful using the brute force method. It does work occasionally, but it's not the norm. And when you're going to do it, then the volume of the brute force is what's really going to help most people win, or they're just the knowledge of whatever that type of project is. That's where they're typically going to do it. The other thing in the construction space that's really interesting, where the brute force method does sometimes come into effect, is when people are not bidding on things. We've got some guys down in Austin, Texas, that they've developed this software for construction companies, where they go out and look at RFPs, and based on the data, they can tell how many bidders are going to be on it. And their goal is always to be the only bidder on a project, where they're like, hey, the odds are no one's going to bid on this but us. And if that's the case, we can raise our margins and we can win this, and we may not know the customer. But you've got to have the right tools to be able to do that, in my opinion. When it comes to staying top of mind from contracting officers, there's a couple of things that I would stress. One is, most people don't go through the process of setting up a capability brief with them. Absolutely, one of the first things you should do is a capability brief. Once you identify who's buying what you sell, which is really easy to do. There's a lot of free software from usaspending.gov to sam.gov. You can go in the data banks and find exactly who's buying it, the contracting officer names. You can reach out to these people and request a capabilities brief. That's the number one thing. Number two, and this one is, I don't know why people are not getting this. I've been pounding this drum for a long time. Connect with them on LinkedIn and stay connected there. Watch the stuff they post. Go check your contracting officer's posts. Reply to those posts. Add value to those posts. For me, I would rather start there on social media and build a relationship for a month or two before I even call to request that capability brief. Because if I do, I'm no longer Mike calling from God knows where. Oh yeah, Mike from LinkedIn. I know you. I'm that guy now. And it's just so much easier to do that. So those are just two things that are real quick and easy to do. And then the third one is to get involved with your small business offices for those agencies, as well as the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business, if you qualify for one of those statuses. And so if you get involved with them and ask them for assistance as well of, hey, I'm already talking to Sue Smith in this office because she buys what I sell. Is there anyone else in your agency that I should be talking? Can I come do a capabilities brief with you? And so once you're connected to more people in the agency, not just the CEO, then you have more reasons to reach out to people. I'll give one more quick one here is find out who the PM
let's hear
is.
It. Let's hear it, dude.
Yeah,
let's hear it.
Yeah, like who's the PM on this stuff? Like, whether it is the program or project manager, you want both of those people. Connect with those people, because guess what? They're the major influencer for the contracting officer. Contracting officer is almost like an accountant. They have a bunch of money and they're trying to spend it. They don't necessarily care where they spend it, but there's a program and a project manager somewhere that are like, hey, these are the things that I need and why I need them to do this project. Connect with those people. Get to know who they are.
Yeah, these project managers or facility managers, they're the one with the problem, and they want the problem fixed. So they go to the CEO and say, hey, I got this problem. And then the CEO is the one who puts it on the street. So if you can connect with that facility guy or project guy, then you have a better chance of winning the deal.
And I've been in discussions where I'm sitting there with the program manager and we're talking about something and they bring in the CEO to say, hey, I wanted to introduce you who we're going to be working with, that type of thing. Now, in my situations, I've often been the guy that has a solution that nobody else has. And that's a great place to be in. But even if you're not, when you're getting to know those people and you're helping them solve problems, that's the game changer for them. And if you can't find those people by just, another brute force method of just making phone calls and things, go back to LinkedIn. A lot of people that I work with in government are all on LinkedIn. You can search project, program manager, all that kind of stuff. You can put in other keywords if there's a specific contract, and you can find those people on LinkedIn all the time and connect with them right there.
And if you could, in summary, how do we find that capability brief? What website? What exactly do we do?
So to build a capability brief?
Correct.
Is that the question? So the capability brief, and here's the beauty of it. It's really just an expanded version of your capability statement. And everybody has that one-page capability statement. If you don't have one of those, you can go on one of our websites, federal-access.com, sign up for a free account. And I believe we have 4 different templates that you can choose from for your capability statement. And all it is it's a corporate overview. It's a little bit about what your company does. You've got your NAICS codes, PSC codes, your SAM UEI is on there, some past performance logos maybe, and any other certifications and things like that. And all you're doing is putting that into PowerPoint and going over that with them. So you're talking about a 7-8 minute presentation, maybe 10-minute presentation that you can do with them to tell them about your capabilities. But that's probably the least important part of the capability brief. The most important part is when you get to the end and you start asking them questions. So tell me about what projects are coming up at the agency that I should be aware of. Tell me where you're going to be, which events that you're hosting or you're speaking at, things like what events do you go that I should go to? And you just start asking them questions about how they buy what you sell. And that's really one of the most important parts of that brief.
Good stuff right there. I and I've been a brute kind of just dialing for dollars kind of businessman and
Yeah,
had success, but I'm going to implement some of these strategies that I'm learning from you today. And I'm curious, is it possible to do those capability briefs over a Zoom if somebody lives far away and they can't go into the office?
absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I've only sort of lived in a hotel in DC for 2 years while I was working there. I was commuting to DC, but for the most part, I've never lived near my clients. I've always lived hundreds of miles from my clients. So I've always done it over the phone. Didn't before there was Zoom and all that kind of stuff. You're just talking to them over the phone and saying, "Hey, let me walk you through this." And now we've got Zoom and all these things. I just did a podcast. I think we put it out this week called On Demand Capability Briefs, where let's say you can't get a hold of the contracting officer for whatever reason, they will not return your phone call. Record it. Simply record it, drop it in a software like Loom, where as soon as they go and click the link, you'll know they watched it or they watched all of it or whatever it is like that. And then you can follow up, hey, hey, Sean, I saw you, finally watched the capabilities brief. I hope you got a lot out of it. Let's connect to answer some questions, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different ways you can get to them now with all the technology we have. So
I love that. Now I'm curious on your side of the thing. You do technology, I do construction, but there's so many similarities, I'm sure.
mhm.
Like when it comes to government contracts, is there ever a scenario where the government says your bid is too high? Because in our section there is. We hear that often and there's a way around it.
Mhm.
Have you ever come across that? And
Yeah.
you
Typically when that's happening, whether it's software or services, a lot of times what the government will do is they'll go through the down select process, right? You'll hear that a lot of times where, hey, we selected these three companies, and what it really means is these are the three closest one in price, and they usually say this phrase, "We want you to give us your best and final offer." That's kind of what you'll typically hear around that. And when you hear "give us your best and final offer," it doesn't mean you have to actually change your price. It just means you need to justify your price.
Oh
And
really?
if you can do that really well, you don't have to change your pricing at all and you can still win. Most people don't understand their pricing. That's just the way it is. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. Most people don't understand how they get to that bottom line. They just put some numbers in and they think, oh, let's multiply it by 1.7, and then if that doesn't work, next time we'll multiply it by 1.6, and then we'll keep playing with that till we get the right number. But if you know your numbers and you are looking at the historical data, like using tools like calc.gov and going back and looking at past contracts, because you can go back and look at all these past contracts and things and find out what's the government paying for this. You can go look at GSA schedules of your competitors. What's the government paying for this stuff? And once you know that and you really understand the pricing, you can come in and justify your pricing and not have to budge most of the time. So,
It's true that you said that because I got a contract in Galveston, Texas once to change out like some cooling parts for a rusty old AC unit.
mhm.
And they said, hey, your price is too high. And we just justified it really good. And it was like 30 grand or something. And they said, okay, you're right. And we didn't change
Yeah,
our price. And they
yeah.
gave us the contract. Now, I am curious, let's go a little bit further. And since you're doing the service side, I'm sorry, the software side, I'm doing the service construction side. Do you ever come across a situation where they're like, hey, you have to have a local office? And if so, how do you overcome that?
I don't think I have ever had a client tell us that. I know I've seen clients run through situations where they're like, hey, they went with these guys because there's an office that's located 5 miles outside of the base, and proximity was really important to them. But most of the time, I don't see that as an issue.
We have a guy who, within our course that I teach, does over 75 million a year, and he just basically has an office out of his subcontractors
Yep.
building.
Yeah.
Just hires a local sub.
Yep. It's not hard. I mean, that's the thing that I would say for most contractors, again, regardless of what you sell, is it's not hard to fix the problems that the government says is, hey, this is a roadblock to you doing business with us. It's usually not hard. Now, when you get into like bonding and certain things. So some of those can be a challenge. I mean, they can all be solved. I would say the biggest challenge for a lot of newbie government contractors is that first 60, 90 days when you win a new contract and you've got to front load all the cash and wait on those invoices to get paid. That's probably one of the biggest challenges for most government contractors when you're just getting started, because most people aren't sitting on, 2 million in cash. That's just not the way it is for a lot of people. And so having to finance that stuff is often a challenge. And that's why I usually tell people, look, start small. You don't have to go do the $10 million deal right out of the gate. In fact, the government's probably not going to give you a $10 million contract out of the gate. They're going to want to start you smaller than that. And so start small, gain that past performance, and then you can overcome that cash by, starting to stockpile cash and get credit and different things like that. So
beautifully said. I teach the same thing to the people that follow me. Start small, get your past performance up, get a reputation, and then go after the 250 to 500 or the 500 to a million. But don't shoot out the gate for the big ones right out the gate.
And don't be afraid to team with a larger company that has the cash. Don't be afraid to team with them. That's, again, people look at teaming as a bad thing, and it's like, it's only a bad thing if you do it poorly. So
I want to ask you about that, because I have a Hub Zone 8A Native American set aside, and he sees my skill set as a value add. He's like, hey, you're really good at putting in the bids. You're really good at the relationships.
Yep.
What are the steps for somebody like myself that wants to turn in bids for a Hub Zone 8A? And how could I be the subcontractor to get my own past performance up?
Well, it's really simple. I mean, once you've identified a company that wants to work with you and likes working with you, then you just need to identify the agencies you want to work with. And once you identify those agencies you want to work with, typically you just put a teaming agreement in place. And look, here's the deal about a teaming agreement. Not everybody's going to tell you the truth about this. A teaming agreement is really only worth the paper it's written on. It's more of like a letter of understanding between your two companies. People don't have to actually abide by it. I mean, you're never going to win an argument in court with a teaming agreement. It's just not going to happen. It's not a contract, but it is an understanding between you and that company that you together are going to go and bid on an opportunity, and you're going to do part of the work. They're going to do the other part of the work. And then once you win, then there's a sub-contractor agreement that usually gets put in place after that. And so let's say you put in a bid and the government accepts it. The next stage is they put this subcontractor agreement in place with you, and hopefully it mirrors your teaming agreement. They don't come back and negotiate with you. But that's kind of the process on that. So just find an RFP you want to chase or an agency you want to do work with, and put together that teaming arrangement. So
love that. Now, this is going to be a little bit more technical, and you just mentioned some valuable insights that I want to talk about in just a little bit. But on occasion, we come across the situation where you have to go to the pre-con meeting, or you have to have a mandatory site visit. There are strategies that I know to do, but I was wondering if you knew any strategies of how to avoid that pre-con, or how to avoid an actual in-person mandatory site visit. Do you have any strategies for that?
You're breaking up a little bit. So are you talking about like the industry day type of things, or?
No, I'm talking about there's pre-construction meetings, and they have those inside the technology world, but like right when you get the contract, you have to have a pre-con in person. And I was wondering if you had a tactic to avoid having to go in person for a mandatory pre-con meeting.
So almost everybody that I do business with has told me people are very willing to put people on Zoom or whatever it may be, unless you're in the intelligence community where, they're just not going to do that. Almost everybody that I know of they're dialing in. So you've got some people on the phone, some people on Zoom. It doesn't have to be an in-person thing.
And would you say the same? Would you say the same for a mandatory site visit? Just go through Zoom, or do it on a Zoom call or a technology call?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't recommend that. To me, like I think if there is a site visit, an industry day, whatever you want to call them, and they're bringing you through, I would probably have somebody on a plane to go do that. So it's just one of those things. There are things that you will gain from that that you won't get from a Zoom. And look, I used to do that back in the day where I could have hopped on the phone and talked with a client, but I would say to them, look, I'm going to be in your area on, from Wednesday to Thursday. What day can I come and chat with you? Like if I had a really hard time getting a hold of a contracting officer and they'd say, Tuesday at 2:00, I'm like, great, book a flight. I didn't have a flight booked, but I was planning on coming as soon as you gave me a date. And that's the only reason I'll go talk to them, because there's some things that just, when you can't get it to work, where a face-to-face is the game changer, where they actually get to see you and like you and go, yeah, I do want to move forward with this company.
Now, for construction, they're using a Prompt Payment Act. There's been several contracts that I've won where it was zero money out of my pocket, and I worked out a deal where the subcontractor funded and floated, and I promised that I paid them the moment I got paid. Mm-hmm. Is that something that can happen in your side, technology side?
We don't see it near as often. So it doesn't happen near as often. I mean, the most of the time in my side, and again, remember, I'm not just in the software space. We have a lot of service-based, the most common phrase is butts in seats, right? We have a lot of work that happens that way. We have a lot of product stuff that gets delivered. And the most common payment method is, net 30. But when you're thinking net 30, initially it's net 60, right? Because you go 30 days, you submit an invoice, and then you wait 30 days. So that first check is going to take somewhere around 60 days from the day you start work or the day you deliver. So if you're delivering product and it takes you a month to deliver that first bit, and then you've got to invoice, now you're closer to 90 days on getting that first payment. And so that's where having really good vendor relationships come in, because we have a lot of product people, and depending on who the vendor is, some will say, well, you've got to pay half of that up front. I don't care what the order is, you got to pay half up front. And some will say, oh, it's a contract with the VA. We totally get it. You're on net 30. We're on net 30 with you. Once you get it, no problem. So.
Yeah. Because, it's like you want to pay for something that hasn't even been shipped yet. It could get lost along the way. That's why good insurance is there.
Yeah.
So let's say our contractor gets a contract, and he has a subcontractor who's going to do the work in Ohio. Can you determine or tell us how important having a solid subcontract agreement is, and what are some key things that should be in the subcontract agreement?
Yeah, I think having a really good agreement is the difference usually between success and failure a lot of times, because in the construction space, and this is nothing against construction, it's very notorious for a lot of disagreements on what was said, right? Like, hey, I thought you were going to use this kind of crown molding here instead of this, or I thought we were getting, that flooring doesn't look like what I ordered, and oh yeah, it is. There's a lot of different little things that can come up. And so having everything written down in detail, to me, is step one, like a detail of that. And so when it comes to the subcontractor side, I don't like vague contractor agreements. And a lot of times you'll see where people say, oh, we're going to do a work share with you. I don't like those at all. I like when it says, here are the task areas that you're going to be working on, and you're going to be doing 100% of task areas 2, 3, and 7, or whatever it may be. Here are your responsibilities in the task areas. Having that just completely spelled out so that they are very clear on that. Now, look, here's the thing that most people totally forget about this, is just because you wrote it down and they signed it doesn't mean they read it. So before you sign your agreement with your sub, sit down and review it. Hey, do you agree to these things? Do you disagree with any? Did you want us to make any changes to this? You want to get all your stuff from Lowe's because you've got a Lowe's deal, and we usually use Home Depot because that's where our deal is and we get it cheaper. Is that going to be a problem for you? Right. And I'm just making that one up there, but there's things like that that come up, and they are genuine problems for people because they're like, well, I don't have an account at Home Depot. And this is, this is going to be a major problem because not everybody can think outside the box when you throw a little monkey wrench into their life. Right. And so if you sit down and review the subcontracting agreement and make sure you're on the same page, then you can lock that in with some certainty that once there's an issue, you can go back to the agreement and say, oh, here's what we agreed. I even made this concession for you, or whatever it may be. I need you to follow this agreement. You have something you can enforce at that point.
That's so beautiful, because you're only as good as your subcontractors, and it's crucial to connect and communicate. Like, high level communication is so important, because those subcontractors can see you work. They might not have the bond, they might not know how to do the paperwork.
Right.
So
right.
we treat our guys so good that 6 months later they're like, hey, we have a deal out here in Hawaii and we'd like to do it for you. I'm sure you've had something similar like that happen to you.
And it's it's one of the reasons why you start small as well. So instead of starting off on a $20 million project with a sub you've never met, that's basically like going out on the Vegas Strip and picking somebody and going, hey, let's get married. Right? Like, you have no idea what you're getting, right? Yeah. So like, you go in and say, hey, let's do this $100,000 project together. And then even if they screw it up, you can still recover from that. It's just one of those things where you want to start small, build the relationship, and then move into bigger things. Because you may determine that sub is really great at $100,000 projects, but when it gets in the $500,000, they can't keep good notes, or there's some other issues, and they're like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to dismiss them, but I'm only going to use them for small stuff, because they can't handle the stress that comes with a bigger project.
Beautiful. Now, before we get into a painful lesson, because you just triggered that when you said that, I want to ask you a few more technical questions about percentage complete method and how you can front load your construction schedule to ensure that you have cash flow. Because having a solid schedule of values and doing it properly can make or break you. Can you elaborate?
Sure. I think, again, whether it's construction or any other industries, I think when you're looking at what you're doing, you have to be smart at where the profit is, what you already have staff wise, things like that. So if you're going to have to hire people, maybe you don't do that out of the gate. You organize the job so that it's the people you already have on the bench that can be put to work first, because you're already paying for them. So that's not new money out of your pocket. And you look for ways to do that. Let's focus on areas where we've already got staff in place, product in place, whatever it may be, so that we can, like you use the word, front load this and get the checks rolling in, basically, in order to kind of finance this project. So.
Now, there are scenarios where the contracting officer just doesn't answer their phone, and you need to go do a site visit, or you need a technical answer, but they're not answering. What do you do besides sending that? By the way, the brilliant idea of sending that loom, that's the first time I ever heard that. Is there any other tactic that a contractor can do when they need it answered?
Yeah. Absolutely. So typically in a kickoff meeting, you're going to meet a few other people. You're not going to just meet the contracting officer. You're probably going to meet some sort of PM level person. You'll probably meet a core, is what they call them, the contracting officer representative. You'll meet those people a lot of times. So a lot of times you can go through those people if you need the contracting officer to sign off on something for whatever it may be. You can do that route. Another thing that I kind of mentioned this earlier, anytime I'm having trouble reaching a contracting officer, I copy the small business rep on it. On all my communication, because there's something magical that happens. Yeah. Once you start copying the small business rep or the OSDBU, the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization, once you start copying those people on those email threads, it's funny how the contracting officers just wake up and start responding to that kind of stuff. So,
oh yeah, I forgot. I don't want an ombudsman to happen.
Yeah, we just signed this $12 million contract. We need to do the site visit to kick things off, and haven't heard from you in 2 months. And then they see this. The small business rep's like, "What's going on over there?" And it may be the small business rep that comes back and says, "Oh, Susan was in a car accident and is in a coma." And like, oh, you don't need to be. That's going to a dead inbox at the moment. No pun intended there, but it's going to this inbox where nobody's going to be responding to it. We never even thought about it. Julie is now in charge of that, but she's got, 58 things. So let's get her involved and going, and it's just a matter of, to me, one of the biggest lessons that every government contractor needs to learn is you can't get stopped by roadblocks. Like, just because the government is in your way doesn't mean you stop. Like, you keep working it till you get the answer you need. Doesn't mean you be annoying, but just because Susan isn't answering the phone doesn't mean you stop calling. Like, you got to find a way around that.
Yeah. When you try something great, you're going to have curveballs, you're going to have roadblocks, and they're going to happen. You just got to see them as an opportunity for growth and a challenge. Just, hey, I got to overcome this. So before we move any further on that topic right there, how can somebody find, if they're a hubs owner or woman owned, how can somebody find this small business rep if they've never reached out to this person?
So it's really complicated. So I typically just Google like small business office for Fort Hood, or small business office for Army, or small business office FEMA, OSDBU, so the OSDBU, pick whatever agency. That's as hard as it is. And you'll get a list of names right out of the gate, which, by the way, most people don't understand. There's not just small business offices in the government. Guess who else has small business offices? All your large primes. All of your large primes have a small business office. And that is like an entry point. So like if you notice that, let's say Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics or SAIC or you name it is on a contract at your agency and you have no idea who to contact, you can't contact their small business office. Say, hey, SAIC small business office, I'm trying to work on this contract. It's the ABCD contract over at Fort Hood. And I don't know who in your organization is in charge of that. Can you put me in charge of the PM? Absolutely. So
that is absolutely fire brilliance, what you just said. It just made me think of something where you need a good contractor. You can call the big prime, get the estimator on the phone and say, hey, I'm just a small contractor and I need a good paving guy. Who's somebody you could recommend? Which I've done, but I never thought of doing that, actually calling the small business to the big prime. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yep. And if you need contractors like that, one of the things I do all the time is I'll go in SAM or USA Spending. And if it, like, say you're the construction guy and you're building the building, but you need a driveway guy or whatever like that, go in USA Spending, put it in the state that you're working in and put in those NAICS codes and you'll find it. It's not, there's probably,
if I had bombs.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to find that person. There's no excuse for not being able to find somebody who's already, here's the key, already doing business at your agency. They already know the agency.
Okay, so you just opened up a whole can of worms, Michael. Like this was one of the last questions I want to ask you is, what are some other strategies, techniques, templates, ways to find the absolute best subcontractors to get these jobs done?
Yeah, so a lot of people use the dynamic small business search, that website. It's got its issues. And the biggest issue to me for that website is, yes, you will find your Native American, WSB, fill in the blank, whatever on that, but you won't see if they're doing business with your agency. I just go into USA Spending all the time when I'm looking at something like this. I'll put in the NAICS code or the PSC code, or if I have the name of somebody that I know that is a competitor, I'll put their name in there. And I start with USA Spending because, number one, it's very reliable. You don't have to log in, none of that kind of stuff. You can change your searches on the fly. And then once I find some information in there, a lot of times I'll go in the SAM databank and look for that kind of stuff. But I just started USA Spending, and it could be as simple as a keyword, an agency, whatever it may be. And I start looking for the companies that I'm looking for. So.
Wow, you are a wizard. I'm really enjoying this, Michael. My last question for you, for a contractor, what are some ways that they could protect their construction company once they have the job in the bag. They've got the contract. They're about to start. They've already had the good detailed conversations with the subcontractor, but it's 5 states away. What are some ways they can protect themselves from expensive mistakes?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is having a really good project manager on staff or managers. I think you need to have somebody very detail oriented who has got a list of everything that's going on, the timelines of everything that's supposed to go down, and they're not afraid to pick up the phone or hop in a car, hop on a plane, and go look at what's going on. You need somebody like that that's really going to be in charge of it and not micromanage it, but literally be on top of everything. Because the worst thing in the world is for you to have radio silence for 2, 3, 4 weeks and ask what's going on and go, oh yeah, we had to stop work because fill in the blank. And you didn't know until you asked, and it's a month later. You need somebody who's on top of that. And that person needs to be trained that, look, whether it's daily, weekly, we need regular reporting from our subs. Here's what that reporting cycle needs to look like. Here's all the milestones that you're tracking and all that. But, I don't want to wait till the end of, milestone period 1. I want stuff on a daily, weekly basis, whatever it may be. I want a process for handling things that are out of scope. I want a process for handling things that are emergencies or unexpected disasters, or, hey, you know what? A hurricane just ripped through Florida. How did that impact the project that we're working on in Florida? The biggest thing is you just need a project manager that is on staff that can monitor every detail of the project. And they're going to escalate as soon as anything goes off the rails.
Love that. That's the truth right there. Now, Michael, you have been through this for over 20 years. You've assisted and facilitated and helped contractors of all different types, from technology to construction, to win hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion+ worth of contracts.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody wants to reach out to you, they want more information, how can you help them, and what do you have to offer?
Sure. So we work with every kind of government contractor you could ever imagine. We have coaching and training programs. We have an online DIY system called Federal Access. So you can go to federal-access.com and learn more about that. You can get started for as little as $29, and there's all the documents, templates, training videos you'd ever need are all there in Federal Access for that. And then there's coaching programs if you want somebody to hold your hand and go through that. Easy way to get a hold of me, go on the Federal Access website. There's a contact form on there, or you can go find me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, and just shoot me a message there.
Michael LeJeune, owner of Game Changer Podcast for Government Contractors, absolutely crushed it today. Talked about all things construction, all the strategies and templates. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being on the Real Construction Owners Podcast today, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.